food system is literally a consumption of oil. Fertilizer, pesticides, tractor fuel, harvesting, transportation, refrigeration, true cost of addiction. We literally eat oil. We're only like one step away from eating our BTUs, or calories as BTUs of oil, right? So we're up to 8 to 9 billion pounds. We're up to 30 pounds per person. It's twice the amount that was concern back when Rachel Carson wrote in 1960s Silent Spring. We haven't stopped, in spite of the fact that Rachel Carson was really the fundamental inspiration of the Environmental Protection Agency. She actually inspired John Kennedy to take a look at, maybe we ought to be having an agency to look at what we're doing to this thing we call our environment. I know that's sometimes a bad word in certain communities, but if you don't like the word environment, use the word ecosystem, because we are ecosystems. Our organs are ecosystems. Where we live is an ecosystem. How we interrelate with other organisms is other ecosystems. We're now affecting 40 states with pesticides, with 100 million people, particularly in the Midwest. I mean, some of the most rural areas of the United States are the most dangerous to live in because of the fallout that comes from. A lot of these pesticides are very, very susceptible to what we call photodegradation. Ultraviolet light breaks them down and they volatilize, and then they move to other communities. And then, of course, we got into the CAFO. This is a big, hot item right now. Most of our foods, meat foods, are produced in concentrated animal feeding operations. Concentration camps, I call it, where we accumulate all the manure and we just stack it up, oftentimes, particularly in the feedlots, and we let the wind carry it, or we let the water carry it, which is one of the reasons why we end up with these dead zones, and why we end up with, as a matter of fact, the hog CAFOs. This comes out of the University of California, Department of Neurology. The hog CAFOs produce an emission called ammonia and hydrogen sulfide gas. The two together are powerful neurotoxins that can cause irreversible brain damage. There's no air regulations on CAFOs. They emit more ammonia than steel mills do, which are regulated under the EPA for air emissions. A CAFO that produces more air emissions than a steel plant does is not regulated because it's considered a farm, right to farm bill. Are they farms? No. Not if they're doing that. I mean, farms should be do thy neighbor no harm. And raising animals humanely and raising foods that have nutrient density. But we're now up to the CDC. Why do we have all these food regulations jumping in by the government to regulate food, the food police? Where's all the food illnesses coming from? We have, according to the Center for Disease Control, 76 reported million annual illnesses annually, 5,000 deaths, 350,000 hospitalizations. These are the reported ones. How many people get food illnesses if they've eaten out in a restaurant and just go home and throw up or have diarrhea but don't go to the emergency room? Lots of people do. They're non-reported. These are the reported ones. And yet, we're out here trying to say raw milk, which most farmers growing up in the old days, farm family after farm family after farm family raised families on raw milk, grown in ecological systems approaches where ecosystems were respected. Now we turn it into a CAFO. We've industrialized the raising of animals. That's the difference. We've industrialized it because we can. We're real good with the opposing index finger and the thumb to make machinery. We're real good at that. And because we're good at it, we've been able to say, convince ourselves, if you can do it with an automobile, you can do it with a cow and a pig and a chicken. That's why we do it. Efficiency, yes, if you don't factor in the passed on costs. I mean, I'm so taken back by every year the same economic idiots come out and say, well, we have the best agricultural system in the world because now a farmer can feed, 57 more people besides himself. Or back in the day, he was only able to feed 12 or 15. Well, using that theory, it's going to be great when we have one farmer feeding all of us. Right? That's where it's headed. If you want to use that theory as a sound theory, that efficiency based on the number of people that can be fed, while the number of producers that can feed them, is all you got to add it up. Forget about quality, forget about environmental degradation, forget about health implications. Just the efficiency based on numbers of people that can be fed, based on mechanized agriculture. In 2005, 30% of our land was severely eroded, and 70% of our rangeland, which is most of our land, by the way, was severely degraded. In Europe, it's not much better, except they've been at it a whole lot longer. How long have we been at it in North America? A few hundred years? How long have they been at it in Europe? A few thousand years. So we're accelerating our level of lack of sustainability. We're getting rid of our ability to get back on track and produce foods that can save this future for these unborn kids that have to inherit what we leave behind. At least 40% of the Earth's vegetative cover is severely degraded. So it's happening everywhere. And one of the reasons why it's happening isn't so much because we have a population explosion. It's because the way we are exporting this industrial model of farming, which is being rapidly adopted by emerging countries, growing economies, are realizing this is the way to grow food. And it only works well when you have economic policies by the government that subsidize those practices. They're not efficient if they have to compete in free enterprise. I'm a big fan of free enterprise. I'm a real foe to conventional current capitalism. To me, capitalism is the enemy of free enterprise. And most people think they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. Free enterprise is all about what this country was built on. Today, capitalism is about he who has the money wins, period, end of story. End of story. So industrialized agriculture creates an empty harvest. And now we're addicted to oil, acidulated fertilizers. Now, the acidulated fertilizers, the problem with acidulated fertilizers is they're very, very unstable. They're very costly to make, first of all. If you take rock phosphate that you mine here in Florida and you want to turn it into superphosphate, you have to acidulate it with acids like sulfuric or phosphoric acid to make them water soluble. Thus, voila, it's plant available. Because plants, everybody knows, cannot take up anything that is insoluble. What they miss is that the solubilization of nutrients that goes on in the woods around here doesn't go on because somebody's out there with sulfuric acid dribbling it around those trees. It's going on because the acidulation process comes from things like carbonic acid. And carbonic acid comes from where? Carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the breath of life. It's the waste breath, the exhalation of all life forms. Excrete or exhale carbon dioxide. When it reacts with water, it produces carbonic acid, and that's the acid nature uses to gradually acidulate insoluble compounds and make them soluble to the plant. We, in our mechanized way, say, well, let's turn that process into high gear and take phosphoric or sulfuric acid, throw it on the rock materials, make it highly reactive. You throw it on the ground, and what happens is, this is a very unstable chemical, and it tends to react with other chemicals that are naturally occurring in the soil, like limestone. So it puts it right back into an insoluble form, where you're only getting maybe 11%, 12% of the active ingredient to stay active, and the rest of it goes right back into an insoluble form anyway, thus requiring more and more biology over time to get it back into the plant. And as we use more of these pesticides and more of these acidulated fertilizers and poor tillage practices, and our organic matter leaves, and our humus levels drop, and our biology disappears, what happens is we become more addicted to a more and more expensive process and absolutely create poor fertility and nutrition in the plants because they can take up less and less and less. They become addicts. Addicts aren't healthy people, are they? People who are addicts are not healthy people. Plants that are addicted are not healthy specimens. So we have all this topsoil we're losing. And I'm going to tell you right now, you look at the history, go down to the NRCS office, Soil Conservation Office, and look at Loudermilk's work. You can get that publication from NRCS. Loudermilk, Professor Loudermilk did the research. What caused civilizations to collapse in the Mediterranean basin? Europe, North Africa, the Middle East.